Please welcome our next speaker, Hamish Sheild, a director, consultant, and Microsoft MVP. Today he will be presenting, Is It Worth Automating? Please stick around after Hamish's session for live Q&A.
Is it worth automating? Now, this is a question that you should always ask before yourself or your colleagues go deep into building a technical solution. Now, my name is Hamish Sheild, and I'm going to be helping you find the answer to this question as part of this presentation for Dynamics.com. Now, I am a Power Platform consultant based in New Zealand and also a Microsoft MVP. So in this session, I'm going to start off with why do we need to ask this question in the first place, what we need to do to answer this question, and how you go about getting that answer, and then also some tools that you can use to help yourself along the way. So let's start with why. And this is a big buzzword at the moment. Everyone's talking about it, but why is because everyone's in this process of digital transformation. And I've got this kind of rather lengthy definition here. But when it comes to digital transformation, if you take into account the current churn rate of businesses, about half of the S&P 500 companies are going to be replaced over the next few years by digitally native companies who are kind of capitalizing on new advancements in technology such as AI and robotic process automation. And so digital transformation is not just about digitizing your processes. You actually need to avoid being disrupted by these digital natives. And in order to do that, you need to innovate. So cue another buzzword. So innovation, I guess, is defined as the ability to generate and execute on new ideas. And innovation, being a buzzword, is used a lot, and people think it's about coming up with crazy and wild and brand new ideas. But it's not really that. That's kind of your revolutionary type of innovation. This is where you're going to bring in a brand new idea and you're giving it to a new set of users. Whereas most innovation is actually around this kind of either evolutionary or incremental. Evolutionary being you've got a new ideas that you're giving to an existing user group, or you've got an existing idea that you're giving to a whole bunch of different users. And then a lot of innovation that we do, and especially with the Power Platform, is really around this incremental innovation. So it's about taking existing ideas and giving them to existing users and mashing them up to come up with a new solution. And so the Power Platform is just kind of one of those tools that we use to execute on those new ideas. So when it comes to, good innovation, it's really the balance of a solution that's technically feasible. So with the technology that we have today, you can actually build and make the solution. It's viable from a business perspective. So you're going to get a good return on your investment in the solution, and that it's also desirable from a human standpoint. So people are actually going to use this digital solution that you build. And so asking the question, is it worth automating, is really part of that satisfying the business viability part of innovation. And so if you don't have a solution that's viable from a business perspective, then you're unlikely to get buy-in from your stakeholders and the sponsors. They're the ones that are going to be paying or subsidizing these projects, and so you're going to find it very hard to get a project across the line if you can't prove return on investment. And I'm sure we've all seen a number of Power Apps and flows being created, and it seems like they kind of get created for the sake of creating an app because it's cool or it's desirable, but often doesn't add value. And you do hear of these companies around the world who have created hundreds of Power Apps, and that's their kind of measure of success. But you do wonder how many of those apps are actually adding value and are actually giving a return on investment. And that's really the true measure of whether innovation is successful or not. So what do you need to do to answer the question, is it worth automating? And really this comes down to a cost versus a benefit analysis. So consider how much effort it's going to take to build the solution, and then weighing up the business value you would get out of that solution versus the costs. And so what I'm going to do is go through a bit of an example which is around expense processing. And I'm going to be open and honest here. I've actually stolen this example from the Power Apps website. In part of the documentation, they go through how to approach Power Apps projects, and this is actually part of it. So I'm going to essentially walk you through it because it's actually really good content. So in this scenario, collectively as a team, all these people are involved in the expense processing process, and they kind of face very kind of similar situations and problems. And so in this example, everyone does have their own issue, but they have kind of these common issues in that this approval process is very paper-based, it's tedious, it's manual, difficult to manage. And so for people like Lee and Shauna and Rebecca, when they're putting together their expense reports, it's super time-consuming, very tedious. Nick is getting overwhelmed with the number of approvals he's got to do, and then Abbe and he's the accountant, and with his team as well, just have to do a lot of manual processing to take those expense reports, put them into the financial system, make sure it's all approved and proper, and then they've actually got to manually create an Excel export for Charlotte, the CFO, who has no idea what's going on until Abby and the team produce this manual report for it. So overall, this looks like a really good process digitized using the Power Platform. But to get stakeholder or sponsor buy-in, we've still got to have some hard evidence around it's actually going to be worth doing. And so first of all, we start off with looking at what's the cost of doing nothing. We don't always have to go and digitize everything because we're doing a digital transformation. So if we didn't solve the problem, what would be the costs to the business as it currently stands? And so what we can do is we can take a look at the business processes and the steps within those processes, and look at how much it costs inside of each step. And we can do that based on the people doing the work and how long it takes them to do the work, and then add in other costs such as licensing and equipment and materials that are associated with it. So I'm going to break this down and get a little laser pointer out, and we'll start with Lee. So Lee is part of the sales team, and there's a team of them, and they fill in expense reports every month, and it can take them up to an hour to do, and there's 140 of these reports. And so if we look at average an hourly cost per person of say $90, then we're looking at around $650,000 per year just to fill in expense forms and do the reports. In this process, how it currently stands, being very manual, Nick, as the sales manager, is just overwhelmed with approval requests that he doesn't actually do any approving. There's just too much to do. It takes up too much time. So he leaves all of that approval work up to the accounting team. And so what they do is they review all the expense reports. It takes about 15 minutes for each one. And often, there's data is wrong, there's information wrong on them. They've got to actually go back through if it's not approved, then it goes back through a process where someone else is going to fix it up. And so all that time adds up, and it comes to about $200,000 worth of effort per year. Then they've got to, once the expense reports are approved, they've then got to add in accounting codes and then post those transactions into their financial system. So overall, through all these people just plainly doing their work, it's about $1 million per year in costs of employing someone to do this work. Let alone someone like Charlotte, who is the CFO, has compliances and policies to manage. If she doesn't get the right reporting, then there's risks of penalties and all sorts of other costs associated with that as well. So now that we've got the cost of doing nothing, we look at, well, what would be the business value if we did implement a solution? And so at this stage, you'd have a fair idea of what your solution would be and what its components would look like. And we can then start looking at, we're estimating what our expected future costs would be with this solution. And so you can split business value into 4 different areas. One is around revenue. So is your solution going to generate new revenue for the business on top of what you earn already? There's efficiencies. So are you basically cost saving? Have you got efficiencies in your work, and so you're reducing the amount of costs it takes to carry out your operations? There's volume, the volume area. So basically, cost avoidance. So as your business scales and you want to maybe process more expense reports, can we do that without having to hire more people or add more expense in? And then there's a kind of other category around anything that helps, I guess, the business in terms of its muster requirements around compliance and policy and that sort of thing, and avoiding financial penalties from that. So if we look at the new process, and we obviously haven't got any detail around what it technically does, but let's say we've got an app and some power app, and there'll be some Power Automate in the background automating some of this stuff. With Lee in the sales team, so basically this new app is going to take away from their paper-based solution and reduce the time it takes to put an expense report down to 20 minutes per report, down from an hour. So it's about a third in reduction in costs. Costs are a third of what they were before. So you're looking now at $215 to carry out that step in the process. Now, when it comes down to Nick as the sales manager, now the solution makes it a lot simpler to do approvals. All he has to do is approve that the expenses are against the right codes and that they have receipts. But all the other data that had to be approved and looked at beforehand is all managed by the app and the input of the app, and the app does all the validation around that. So Nick now needs to spend just 5 minutes reviewing every expense report, and that kind of comes to around $55,000 worth of time there per year. When it comes to the accounting team, so pretty much their job has nearly been removed in terms of processing these expense claims. Until when it comes to the approval, so all the approvals are done by Nick, and then when it comes through them, because the app's checked everything else, it's literally just a very once-over check to make sure everything's okay, but minimal to zero cost there. And then when it comes to putting codes against the expense items, putting those items into its journals into the financial system, again, that's all fully automated. If you're collecting all the data in an app, then Power Automate or can put that into your finance system, whether it's through an API or it could be through robotic process automation. And so if we add up all these costs, the costs of the new process, and this is what we're expecting, would be around $270,000 per year. So overall, this is giving us a close to $800,000 per year savings from the original process. So far, we're looking pretty good in terms of this as a definite project that you would go ahead with. But you do need to also look at the return on investment, because that is about comparing what you actually will be saving, but with how much it costs to implement. And so if it costs more to implement than what you saved, then it's obviously not worth doing. But let's say on this project here, you've got this annual savings of $800,000, and we take away implementation costs and license costs, so which are let's say it's around $200,000. I mean, that's still it's still a lot of money for what kind of looks like a fairly simple implementation. But then you're getting payback within about under 3 months or less, and that's kind of a standard statistic in terms of there's a Forrester report which is reported. Did a study against a whole bunch of businesses who run Power Apps and Power Automate, and typically payback for a Power Apps or Power Automate solution within 3 months or less. And if you compare that to, say, traditional projects, if you're doing large kind of CRM or ERP implementations, your return on investment is it's years. It's a lot longer, and so it takes a lot to recover the investment you've put in. And so now that we've kind of calculated what we would expect out of the solution, we need to make sure that the returns are actually delivered. And so we can do this by measuring our success, and we do this by setting SMART objectives. So SMART, I think everyone's probably aware of this, but SMART has been S for specific, M for measurable, A for assignable, R for realistic, and T for time bound, so that everything has an end date by when it should be achieved. And so, just looking at some examples here, we've got listed. There's certain objectives you can put in place to make sure that, and you can measure these really easily because you're using the SMART acronym for them, and it can really help you stay on track and ensure that you are meeting your expected outcomes. So let's look at how we can go about answering these questions. I've kind of gone through the theory of what you need to do to answer the questions, but let's go through how and some tools that you can use to do this as well. So I'm go back to our innovation diagram, but for a solution to be viable, it has to be desirable. And so what I mean by that is if people are not using your solution, then it's definitely not going to return the business results that you want. So that's a really good starting point for, approaching, finding out whether or not it's worth automating. And if you come back to our kind of diagram around the different types of innovations, you can see that we are essentially taking new ideas and combining them with different types of users or users. So people or users are kind of at the heart of all this. And so we can start very simply with this. It could be doing things like interviews, spending a day in the life of, just getting an understanding of the people and their pain points that they're currently going through, and that will help give you an idea of where you can add value through a digital solution. But I guess those sorts of initial things, they're good for a start, and they're quite quick to get a bit of feedback. But they're quite fluffy, and it's kind of up for interpretation of whether or not a solution is actually going to add value. And so there are some other tools and techniques, which I'm going to show you now, that help us be a bit more definitive about adding value. So the first one is, I guess, a very simple tool. So maybe once you've done a bit of some interviews and spent a day in a life off and got a good understanding of where the opportunities for improvement may be, you can then look at something like an effort impact matrix. And this is a very easy tool, and it comes in kind of after you've done maybe an ideation session. You've got a whole bunch of ideas, but you're not too sure where to start or what to prioritize. And this is a very simple tool which basically has effort along the bottom, so low to high in terms of how much effort it will take to put together. So that's kind of your costs of implementation, and then low to high impact, which is essentially your return. What return are you going to get? What cost savings you're going to get out of it? And so as a group and as a team, you can take your ideas and you can plot them very simply on this chart and get consensus of what things you should be focusing on. And what we really want to be focusing on are things that are in the high impact but low effort, and which is kind of the do now category. You may have other things that are high impact but high effort, so it becomes more of a project. And then you've got things that are high effort but to low impact, which you probably will never do unless some new technology comes out which makes that effort a lot less. So essentially this gives us, I guess, if you're doing a workshop with a group of people, you can get a really quick consensus on around about approximately what are the best things to focus on. And then you can, once you've identified those ideas to focus on, you can go into some more tools to make that, get a bit more detail out of it. So this brings us to the Innovation Backlog App, which is a new app that's come out as part of the Power Platform Centre of Excellence Toolkit, and basically allows people in your organisations to submit ideas for improved processes or apps or anything within an organisation. And so what the people do is they come into this app, they create a new idea, and it's got about 6 steps that it walks the user through and gathers information and kind of automatically kind of calculates or estimates things like cost and time savings. And so here's a screenshot from some of the Microsoft documentation. If we kind of look at how it's all broken down, is you have a list of ideas on the left hand side, And there is when they create a new idea, there's a wizard that takes them through these steps. And this here, what we're seeing here is kind of the output or the end state of one of these ideas. And so one of their ideas is around automating environment provisioning. So obviously the IT team have a hell of a time provisioning environments, and it's a bit of a time suck for them. And so you can put in things like pain points to categorize these ideas. But what we have down here is these estimates. So estimating return on investment. So how much are they going to save a month or gain per month in terms of revenue, and how many hours are they saving per month. So obviously, I'm not too sure about the data here. It's a very costly exercise for not a lot of time. And then also, if you've filled in all the information properly, you also get a complexity score. And so what essentially this gives is kind of your parameters or your inputs for your impacts effort matrix, where your impact comes from investment return of estimated return of investment numbers, and your complexity is how much effort it is going to take. And so you could take the data from this app, plot it on a Power BI report, and have your overview of your effort impact matrix, and give you a high level overview of all of your ideas in your business, and which ones you should start on immediately. And so a really good way of getting your organization all on board. And the way that we innovate the best is by people coming out with lots of different ideas. And this is a really way to get everyone engaged. And so once the idea is posted, people can like it, so they can vote for it, which is another way of gauging how important it is to people. And then you can do things like assign it to a developer team to start working on it and owning it, and people can monitor the status of this idea as it goes through development. And the next tool that we have as part of the Power Platform Toolkit is a thing called Process Advisor, which is also a new addition. It's in preview at the moment, and it's part of the Power Automate, part of the Power Platform. And basically what it does is it records your business processes and then analyzes those. So basically you do a manual task on your computer, and it will record the steps, and then it'll give you some analytics about that process. And then what it basically does is help you discover where your inefficiencies are and where your opportunities are for optimization of that process. And so what you can do is you take this, you can set up a process in the system, and you can share it with a whole bunch of other people. So if you've got a whole bunch of people, for example, submitting their expenses, you get everyone to install this app and record the steps that they go through when they're submitting their expenses. And so the way that it works is it runs off Power Automate Desktop, which is the same tools that are used for robotic process automation. And you open up that and you use the Power Automate Desktop to record your manual steps of what you're doing. And then so once you've finished your process and you've stopped recording, it kind of prepares, it kind of gives you a list of all the steps you've been through, and you need to do a bit of preparation in terms of getting it ready for analyzing. And so you can do things like, say, removing sensitive data, like passwords you've entered or whatever, removing sensitive screenshots, those sorts of things, and then also grouping the different clicks or actions you did into activities. And so activities are ways of just kind of helping visualize the process. So they could be, if we're looking at something like entering timesheets, it could be, open the timesheet, enter the time, submit the time, approve the time. And those would be the core steps in your process. And then after that, all the hard work's done, you then run the analytics. There's a little button you push, it analyzes all the information that you've collected and how you've sorted it and grouped it into actions. And it gives you an output which looks like this on the screen. And there's two reports that it gives you. The first one is a process visualization. And so what it gives you is basically a process map of how people go through the different steps in a process. And it's this one is quite interesting. You can see where not everyone does the same step. People skip certain steps, which could indicate they're not actually following the process properly, and you may have kind of data or compliance issues. But for each little branch that it goes down, it tells you kind of the average time that takes someone to do that branch. So you can then start kind of zoning in and focusing on, well, hey, this part of the process takes 5 times as long as the rest of the parts. That's the bit that we should focus on trying to solve and make more efficient. So a really nice way to visualize what's happening with your processes and where they're slow and where the gaps are. And so the second part to Process Advisor is more of a kind of a KPIs type dashboard, which basically gives you a summary of how long, say, either each step in the process takes and what are the longer steps, and then also even down to what people or what recordings have taken the longest. So if there's a certain person who is doing it faster than anyone else, maybe it's not a technical solution that we're putting in. Maybe it's that this person's got a way of doing it that is optimal, and then everyone should adopt their way of doing it. So a really cool little tool, easy to set up. The instructions and the documentation for Microsoft are really good. And it's in preview at the moment, so it's available to everyone right now. So I definitely encourage you to go and test it out, because it's gives you some pretty neat insights very easily. So so those are some of the tools you can use to help be really definitive about what you're going to digitize and what you're going to automate. And you can say, if a process takes X number of hours, and you can guarantee you're going to rather take that time away or reduce it by an amount, then you can start calculating how much cost savings you're getting, and that kind of helps feed into your how much ROI you're going to get back. But once you've kind of decided on what you're going to solve, and you start maybe building a digital solution, you want to, I guess, make sure that you are, as you're going through the build phase, achieving your objectives. And so taking this sort of kind of very quick sort of iterative cycle where you prototype up a solution and get it into the hands of the real users early, you get them to test it, you start measuring results, and you can even use the Process Advisor to do that through the new digitized process. And then from those results that we've measured, and those can be obviously again compared against our objectives as well that we set earlier. What do you learn from those measurements, and then how can you refine your solution or your prototype to put it through the iteration again? So we're doing these very small kind of iterative build cycles. I guess we're kind of talking like agile sorts of ways of working, but with this kind of very much measure and learn piece to it. You can easily refine your solution and make sure that you're on the way and you're on the track to achieving the objectives that you set out to, and getting the return on investment that you've probably promised your stakeholders at the start. So I'll leave you with a few references here. So these are pointing to most of the documentation and some of the slides I've actually been through around how do you calculate costs and those sorts of things, and then links to the Process Advisor and the Innovation Backlog app as well. So I just want to thank you for attending this session on Is It Worth Automating? And I really hope you've got something out of this. There are a few tools there, so I hope you can kind of take away and start using, and use those to, I guess, prove to someone that building this app really is worth automating, and get people to sponsor it and buy into it. Finally, I also want to say thanks to DynamicsCon for having me. As always, it's a great experience, a really smooth event, and I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone live on the day. But now we're going to take some questions. So please put some questions into the chat, and I'll come online and answer them. Thank you. Hi everyone, thanks for joining my session, and welcome to DynamicsCon. I hope you've had a great event so far. It's been some really good and interesting sessions. Put your questions into the chat down there if you've got any questions for me. What I will do if I don't get any questions, though, actually there's a bit of interest and a bit of chat on the feed about the Innovation Backlog app. So I might actually take you through a bit of a demonstration of it. For people who are, I guess, wanting to get hold of this app, if you, as part of the Centre of Excellence starter toolkit, sorry, and it's our components. You don't have to install the whole toolkit to get this app. It's actually a standalone installation, and it's pretty easy to set up. So have a go at it, and you can explore it pretty quickly. Just in terms, before I get started, I might just go through, and there's a question here from being around. Are there any application types that work better with the Power Automate desktop capture for analysis? Web apps versus kind of standard Microsoft apps, or line of line of business kind of legacy apps. I haven't used it too much. So I guess the process I've been using with are, and I can show you an example, but basically for I'm recording my timesheets in Project Service Automation on the web client, so it works really well for that. I haven't had done too much with it in terms of kind of like a Windows app. But I understand it's the same engine behind Power Automate Desktop. So whatever Power Automate Desktop can do, it can record the same steps as well. Right, so I'll take you through a bit of the innovation backlog, and what we'll do is I'll go through, I guess, the process of adding an idea, because I didn't really cover that in the presentation. And so what you do is you come and you add a new idea, and anyone, if you share this app out with your business, then anyone in the business can come in and log ideas as they come up with them. And so let's just do expense processing as we had before in our example in the presentation. And you can give some sort of keywords if you want people to be able to search and find this more easily. And then you can tag it with a whole bunch of kind of pain points. I'm going to say this is going to do with pen and paper forms. It's time consuming as well. And then basically it's got it gives you a wizard that you step through to log this innovation. And as part of that, you can see we start kind of measuring and looking at ROI. So it's quite it's pretty, I guess, rudimentary, but it gives you, I guess, a good indication of how complex this app would be and what benefits you'd get out of it. Okay, so basically select. I think you can select in here the teams that are impacted. I'm going to put a demo team in there, and then as part of some of the calculations, you can put in, say, there's 10 people impacted by this, and you can give a list of people who are affected by this workflow. So let's put in here consultant as a participant, and the managers because they approve the timesheets and the expenses, sorry. And then this next screen is really interesting around, it talks about choosing some tools that you use to, in terms of processing expenses. And so really what this does is it kind of gives you a few tools in terms of, you can select ones that are kind of more manual based tools, but then the rest of them, you'll notice there are just icons of all the connectors. So it kind of helps you build up a view of what connectors you'll actually need to use in your solution as well. And then also looking at things like licensing, would you need to get a premium license for these connectors? So I'm using Project Service Automation, so I know that I'm going to need to use the Common Data Service connector. I think that's the one there. And then I can go next. And so this is the kind of interesting bit where you get to start kind of measuring return on investment. You've got a whole bunch of different areas to work on. So I can say, let's have a look at the time we spend on doing manual work around this. We can see that the consultants spend, and this could be entering expenses. And we can do the number of people performing the task. We kind of maybe there's 10 consultants. Let's look at tracking the
the monetary value of time. So let's say what's their average kind of cost per hour to the company. I'm going to do say $80 per hour as a cost, and they may spend, let's say, 30 minutes per week doing this exercise. If we save that, then it starts giving us, we'd be spending 22 hours a month on manual work, which in terms of dollar value, is almost $2,000 per month. So you can see that you can add in other measures as well. So there's ones that are not necessarily to do with time, but to do with kind of other numeric entries, or you can even do like non-numeric entries as well to help kind of weigh up the value of this automated in this process. So you can add as many measures as you want, and it obviously will come and total up to the kind of the total business benefits you'll get out of this. Then it comes into things like, do you have kind of a workflow process map? This would be quite interesting if you bring into maybe the process advisor, which kind of gives you a process map as part of that. So I'm just going to say no to this, and then it gives you options to go and create your own process map with the process mapping tool. So it kind of encourages the user to give as much information around this innovation as possible. Because out the back of this kind of goes into like an innovation backlog, and then developers can say, well, actually, this is quite an interesting app. I'd like to pick this up. And if you've given them enough information, they can go and start working away on it. So the final one is kind of around doing a complexity score. So it gives you a summary of the information you've already entered, but you can kind of enter more information here as well. I'm just going to say it's 5 steps in the workflow. We do need to attach for expenses invoice receipts. We don't need to be offline. It won't be shared to the tenant, and the data can be shared amongst the users. That's fine. You get to say how often the solution will be used. So it's going to be it's used on a weekly basis. I can tolerate some downtime. That's fine. And let's say there's going to be a few tables in terms of the database set up for this. And so once you complete that, get rid of that one. So you can see now we've got 2 ideas submitted. We've got expense processing and timesheets that we've done before as part of the demo. It's given me a complexity rating and estimates that we put into this. And so from here, people can start voting on this. Obviously, I've voted on it already, and then developers can say, come and pick this idea up and start working on that. So pretty kind of brief overview of the application itself, but to say, come in here, have a play around with it. It's it's easy to install, so ask your administrator to install it for you. The other thing I'll talk to, I haven't got any other questions coming in, but is the Process Advisor app as part of Power Automate. So this is in preview, as I said, as well. So anyone can use it. It's free to use right now while it's in preview. Once it goes into general availability, obviously there'll be some licensing implications that come in with that. And I'm not too sure how that will be licensed in terms of is it a separate license from Power Automate or if it comes with it. But essentially what I've got here and what I'm showing you is a list of recordings I've done while I've been doing entering timesheets into Project Service Automation. And so it gives you a bunch of recordings. You can see basically the status of these recordings are either analyzed or ready to analyze or not analyzed. And so once you've kind of gone through and recorded all of your steps, they come in as not analyzed state. And so what you need to do is you open up one of these. And you need to do a couple of things. One is the thing called add activities, and these are the things like open timesheet, add timesheet. These are activities just to kind of signify the high level steps in your business process flow as you go through it. So you can see in here, if I kind of click on each of these, actions I've done that's been recorded, and we'll kind of step through some of these. You can see they kind of gives you a description of what happened, and the description's usually not very helpful because it's very technical, but you also get screenshots of, and that's probably the best thing, screenshots of what you're going through. And so you can kind of review all these and go, well, actually, under add timesheet, and all these steps under here, all the way through down to here, these are all adding one timesheet entry, and then I've done another timesheet entry as well. So I'm going to split this process up into opening a timesheet and adding 3 timesheet entries. And so once you've kind of finished categorizing everything, and at the same time you can do things like delete the screenshots or delete out any personal kind of password information, anything like that sensitive. You can edit descriptions and the action names and those sorts of things as well. So it kind of makes it a bit easier for someone else to follow. But once you're finished, you can tag it as being ready to analyze and save that. And so I'm just going to close that now and come back to here. So once you've finished analyzing, you'll have a whole bunch that are in, I guess this ready for analyze state. And if I go back to the kind of the parent record, you can click this button called analyze, and what it does, it goes through in the background and analyzes those steps and then starts generating some analytics for you. And that's kind of where it gets really interesting. So the analytics, once it loads, so basically the analytics is a Power BI report. And there's, as I said in the demo and the presentation, there's two reports. I'll just wait for it to open. So the first one is a really interesting process map, and it's it's quite cool how they've put this together. We'll wait for it to load. But feel free, if you're people are still there, feel free to ask any questions that go through this in the chat umbrella. Okay, so here's our process map that it pulls out, and it's really interesting in terms of the things like color coding, and you can see the kind of the branches that people go down. So in terms of what I've recorded in my processes, 75% of the time I'm just adding timesheet entries as part of my work, but you can see they're all very, very quick. It doesn't take long to add a timesheet entry. But then when it comes down to the other branch around submitting and then approving timesheets, you can see that's where I guess a lot of the time is spent, and they kind of get these darker red colors as you're spending more time there. And so you can see, at a glance in this process, if I'm trying to automate something or get the most value out of it, it's probably around this kind of approving timesheets and marking them ready to invoice. And then there's also kind of a time analyst report, which basically kind of looks at different, I guess, time through different parts of the steps. You can see, I guess, similar to what we saw in the process map, but marking as ready to invoice and approving the time are the most time-consuming tasks in this process. So those are the things that you'd want to target in terms of trying to get that time down. And you can use, I guess, these time measurements in your Innovation Backlog app to say, when you're putting in the measures for the Innovation Backlog, you can say, I definitely know that overall, on average, people spend X amount of time approving these invoices or timesheets. And so that's probably about all I really wanted to show you and to talk to you about, and hopefully gives you a bit more of a flavour of these applications that I showed in the presentation. If there aren't any more questions, I'm going to leave you to it and get on with the rest of the conference. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you next time. Cheers. Bye.